your cooperation. Also, please make note of the nearest exit in case of an emergency. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Good evening and welcome. I'm Carrie Weber. I'm the Executive Director of the Fairfield University Art Museum, and the curator for which it stands. I'm so delighted to see you all here. Thank you also to those of you who are joining us on the live stream. Before I say a few words about the exhibition, I just want to give you a quick preview of the rest of the evening. I'm going to offer a few remarks, and then I'm going to introduce Fairfield University President Dr. Mark Nemec to the stage to welcome you. And then he's going to introduce Dr. Aaron Weinstein, Assistant Professor of Politics here at Fairfield, who's both our faculty liaison for the exhibition and the author of a wonderful essay in the exhibition catalog. He's going to speak about the flag as our national symbol, talk about some of the artworks in the exhibition and how artists have responded to flag law, and much more. And when he's finished, he will happily take questions, but because we're live streaming and recording this, I just want to remind you we'd really appreciate it if you'll use the microphones that are going to be available to ask your questions. After the program, I invite you to head up to Bellarmine Hall to view the first half of the exhibition, where our flag story starts in 1918. You can enjoy refreshments in the Diffley Boardroom and the Great Hall, and then come back down to see part two in the Walsh Gallery, which will bring you from about 1990 to the present. You're also welcome to do that in reverse. Shuttle buses will be running all evening between the two buildings. You're also free to walk or drive. The weather has chosen to cooperate with us. Mother Nature has granted us a reprieve from the horrible cold weather, and the predicted snowpocalypse has, waited until Sunday, I think. So it's nice to walk. The Quick Center box office is open this evening, and if you are interested in getting tickets for upcoming Quick Center events, feel free to do that. There are events all spring long related to America 250 and how we are commemorating that here at Fairfield. I want to highlight just one of the many, many programs that the museum is doing relating to our exhibition. The next event is co-sponsored by the Quick Center and does require a free ticket from the box office, so you could grab it now if you want to come. It'll be next Thursday night in this space. It's a screening of a short film called Reclaim the Flag. It was produced by Alexis Bitar and Bruce Cohen. This film explores the American flag as a symbol of unity for all Americans, but particularly the LGBTQ community, and features interviews with numerous thought leaders and artists. The screening will be followed by a panel led by Professor Sean Edgecombe. This exhibition would not have been possible without the generosity of many people and institutions, the artists, our lenders, our donors and sponsors, and I encourage you to look for their names on the labels, the gallery walls, and in the catalog. I do want to extend special gratitude to Horizon Kinetics, Connecticut Humanities, the Maximilian E. and Marion O. Hoffman Foundation, Aquarian Water Company, and Patty and Joseph Sacco for their leadership in supporting this exhibition and for being here with us this evening. I also need to thank our extraordinary museum staff for everything that they did to make this exhibition possible. I was just chatting with someone in the gallery who noted how many loans there were to the exhibition. Megan Pacwa, our museum registrar, managed the logistics for this very large loan exhibition. There are 48 lenders, and works traveled from across the country from as far away as Hawaii. Michelle DiMarzo, our curator of education and academic engagement, had the inspired idea to invite Fairfield faculty and staff to write interpretive labels for selected works. You'll see those marked with a star, and they are an incredible addition to the conversation. We are so grateful to those faculty and staff who took the time to contribute to the exhibition in this way. Heather Coleman kept the finances and the marketing running smoothly, and Elizabeth Vianot has already been hard at work booking the many school visits that she will lead here this spring. For Which It Stands was created as part of the national conversation surrounding the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence in July 2026. Bringing together more than 70 works by a wide range of artists and in an array of media, the exhibition traces the image of the American flag in art from World War I to the present. Across more than a century, these works document and protest, celebrate and critique, creating a complex visual record of our nation's triumphs and struggles. When I began developing this exhibition 5 years ago, I couldn't have imagined the turbulence of the moment we're now living in. But my goal has remained the same: to create an exhibition that encourages civic engagement through art, to help us confront our past, understand the present, and imagine what might come next. As these artists have reimagined the flag, they show us both what we have achieved and what still demands a reckoning. The central question behind For Which It Stands is a simple but difficult one. Can we love this country, take pride in its ideals, and still face its failures honestly? The works that you will see suggest that we can, and that the flag, as a charged and powerful symbol, can hold both celebration and critique at once. You'll hear much more about this from Dr. Weinstein. I hope this exhibition sparks curiosity, reflection, and conversation. Thank you so much for being here tonight. It's now my great pleasure to introduce the president of Fairfield University, Dr. Mark R. Nemec. President Nemec was kind enough to write a short introductory essay for the exhibition catalog, and I'm very grateful for his support of this exhibition and the campus-wide initiative, Fairfield Explores 250 Years of the American Experiment, the Promise, and the Paradox. Please join me in welcoming President Nemec.
Thank you, Carrie. It is my great honor and privilege to welcome you this evening to the opening of Fairfield University Art Museum's exhibit, For Which It Stands, which Carrie Weber and team have so artfully curated, as well as tonight's lecture featuring Professor Aaron Weinstein. Now in our 84th year, Fairfield University is a Jesuit Catholic university dedicated, as our motto states, per fidem et plenum veritatem, through faith to the fullness of truth. As a university, we are animated by an unceasing spirit of inquiry, an authentic humility, and a recognition of the dignity of every person as we seek to educate children of God as individuals of purpose in service of the greater good. As I shared in the essay for this exhibit, American higher education is the embodiment of American exceptionalism. From the founding of Harvard College in 1635 to the founding of Fairfield University in 1942 to today, our higher education institutions have been central to the American project. Our nation's extraordinary history and example is no small way a product of the breadth and depth of our remarkable model for higher education. It is with this Tocquevillian ethos in mind that we are most excited to be hosting a series of events and exhibits in conjunction with our country's semi-quincentennial America 250, the Promise and the Paradox. Tonight, in addition to the opening of this seminal exhibit, we are privileged to be hearing from my friend and colleague in the Department of Politics, Aaron Weinstein. Dr. Aaron Q. Weinstein is an assistant professor in the Department of Politics. He received his PhD in political science from Brown University in 2016 and his BA in government and history, magna cum laude with distinction in all subjects, from Cornell University in 2009. Aaron is also the director of the St. Robert Bellarmine Pre-Law Society. As pre-law advisor, he helps students navigate the law school application process and get in. His primary interests are in the areas of American political thought and religion and politics broadly. More specifically, he focuses on the American civil religion. His recent works seek to update this concept so it can maintain relevance in our current moment. A gifted scholar and teacher, Aaron was recognized for his contributions as the Alpha Sigma Nu Undergraduate Teacher of the Year in 2024. Please join me in giving a welcome to Professor Aaron Weinstein.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you, President Nemec, for those wonderful remarks, and thank you also to Carrie Weber. Carrie, I believe, came to me maybe 4 or 5 years ago and said, would I be interested in being involved in this project? And at the time, 2026, that's not real time. That's not going to happen. And now it's here, and 4 or 5 years worth of work is evident. So when you get a chance to go see the exhibition, please do. It's absolutely marvelous. It is breathtaking. So thank you, President Nemec. Thank you, Carrie. And thank you all for being here. I want to start tonight by trying an exercise that I do with my Intro to American Politics class. And just like I do there, on the first day, I would like you to take a look at the flag and think for a moment on what it means to you, what words come to mind, what emotion it sparks in you. I'm going to be quiet for a few seconds and let you think. So, what comes to mind? Now, when I do this in class, I do have students, record their responses and they email it or they send it in via a mentee presentation. We have a big board that it's projected onto, and I ask them the words, and they say things like freedom, democracy, liberty, prosperity, safety, or security. And those aren't the only words, to be sure, but it's a pretty representative sample. And after some back and forth about why they feel that way, why they think what they think, I show them another image. This one. The Soiling of Old Glory. This is a Pulitzer Prize-winning photograph by the photojournalist Stanley Foreman, and it depicts the moment when a white teenager, a man named Joseph Rakes, is assaulting the African-American lawyer and civil rights activist Ted Landsmark. And I ask my students, again, what do you think? What do you feel? What emotion does it evoke when you see the flag like this? And so I'm going to invite you also to think for a second about how this image makes you feel. And after a moment, the students come back to me and they give me a different list of words. They say things like anger, division, racism, injustice, un-American. And I wanted to start this talk by talking about the Soiling of Old Glory for a few reasons, not least of which is I do think it's one of the most poignant pictures in American political history. But it was a photograph that was taken in 1976, 50 years ago, during the nation's bicentennial year. And so tonight, as the U.S. is turning 250, its semi-quincentennial, it's important, I think, to think about what this country stands for and who we are as a people. And I do think that the flag is the place to do that, to start that conversation. Because at first blush, the flag seems unambiguous. It's clear what it means. It means America. Duh, right? But when you walk through the exhibition, for which it stands, you'll see that that couldn't be further from the truth. Because the flag's meaning isn't unambiguous. It isn't static. It is socially constructed. It's contextual. The flag means something very different on the moon than it does behind Ella Watson, who worked cleaning offices at the Farm Security Administration in Washington. It's malleable. You can see something that isn't the flag, and yet you intuit that it is. And those additions, subtractions, and alterations all add something to its meaning. And it's contested. As you can see here in these images, both from the Vietnam-era protests, one for the war and one against it. By the way, all of these images I just showed you, these are all in the exhibition. So when you get a chance, please go seek these out, and of course the others as well. And that's where I hope that I can come in. Because there are some ways of thinking about the flag that, again, many of us intuit, but sometimes lack the language to talk about, sometimes, to articulate. And this evening, I want to devote some time to at least two of those ways. First, why do many of us treat the flag as a sacred object? After all, it's made out of the same cloth and dye and fabric that clothing and textiles are made out of. So what makes the flag so special? And second, what governs how we treat the flag? Again, this is a specifically legal question, and one that for decades has been a question of First Amendment speech claims. We're going to talk about both of those. And as you'll see, they pull in different directions. The first, the religious interpretation of the flag, suggests that it should be revered, that alteration should be prohibited, or at least could be prohibited. We stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. We have a national anthem, a national hymn, the Star-Spangled Banner. There are prohibitions against tearing, against burning the flag, except again in ways of ceremonial disposal. The word desecration comes up in attempts to limit how people can use and engage with the flag. But the second, the legal interpretation of the flag, suggests that alteration and change is a fundamental political right. Of course, the flag is important, yes, and deserves attention, yes, and many people believe that it shouldn't be touched. But this makes it all the more powerful as a tool in political speech, the highest type of speech protected by the Constitution, because it conveys crucial messages in ways that arguably no other speech can. So, that's where we're going tonight. And let's turn to this first question, this question about the sacred flag. Why is the flag sacred? What turns this everyday material into a sacrosanct thing? And it boils down to one question, which is, what is religion? What is a religion? What makes something religious? And to answer this, I think it's helpful to think a little bit about a guy up here on the screen, Emil Durkheim. And Durkheim is the father of sociology, and he wrote a very famous and influential book in my field, in civil religion studies, The Elementary Forms of Religious Life. And he tries to explain where religion comes from. And again, this will have particular significance for thinking about the flag as a sacred item. And he tells us again about symbols, and specifically also about the flag. The sign is loved, feared, and respected. The sign is the object of gratitude and sacrifice. The soldier who dies for his flag dies for his country. The country will not be lost if a solitary flag remains in the hands of the enemy, and yet the soldier gets himself killed trying to recapture it. We forget that the flag is only a sign, that it has no intrinsic value, but serves only to recall the reality it represents. We treat it as if it were that reality. And so he says, essentially, the flag is loved because we love the country. And we know the country is represented by the flag. Its value isn't determined by what it's made out of, but of course by what it represents. And so to understand the flag this evening, I want to talk about two parts of Durkheim's theory really quickly. First, again, what it means to be a religious item. And second, the core function of what he calls totems, what they play in his theory. So religion and totems. If you're not sure what a totem is, we're going to get there in a second. When we say something is religious, when you and I say something is religious, we tend to mean the belief system that it expresses. More specifically, religion can refer to God or some transcendent entity, a sacred text like the Bible or the Quran, a set of morals. It articulates a vision of the afterlife, perhaps. Something like what you would see here, Michelangelo's creation of Adam. But Durkheim is a sociologist. He is not a theologian. And so he isn't concerned with theological truth as such, but rather with defining what makes something a religion. And he thinks something is a religion because of what it does, not because of what it says, of how it acts. And so for Durkheim, a religion is a set of unified beliefs relative to sacred things that unite adherents in a single moral community. Again, a set of unified beliefs relative to sacred things that unite adherents in a single moral community. Doesn't mention God there, does he? And again, it's not a theological claim. It's about tracing the material origins, what he would say, the material origins of religious belief systems. He tells us religions emerge from objective reality. That, again, they're not the product of divine revelation, but the product of what he would say is social cohesion, of us being together in a society. And Durkheim calls this cohesion effervescence. Effervescence is the sort of social electricity that happens when we get together. And so what we call religion, or ascribe to a religious feeling, is merely the way that society represents this collective effervescence to itself. And again, this may seem like an esoteric point, but bear with me, because it helps us understand how something that we don't think of as religious can, in fact, still be treated as such. Because you and I, we think sometimes of religion and society as two separate things, right, with different characteristics and different origins. But what Durkheim tells us is that they're actually one and the same. They are coterminous. They have the same boundaries. And because they emerge from the same force, right, this effervescence. And you can see some of this at work in your daily life. And to do it, just consider some events that aren't religious, don't take place in a church, for instance, but where people experience them sometimes in this heightened emotional state that they could define as, or think of as, religious. If you're a person maybe of a certain age, you remember Beatlemania. Or today, you can think of the collective effervescence at a Taylor Swift concert. Right? I had a student this last semester who wrote a paper about Swifties' quasi-religious experiences, the emotional ecstasy that leaves them sometimes without any memory of the concert that they just attended, or the way they use friendship bracelets as a symbol, as a sign of their sort of shared community that are exchanged at the concerts themselves. Or you could think about a sporting fan, right? The ecstasy of that last-second touchdown. Or if you're a Pats fan, maybe, of Malcolm Butler's interception against the Seahawks several years ago. I know where I was when that happened. And by the way, go Patriots. If you're a baseball fan, perhaps, it's the final out of the World Series. Or a soccer fan, maybe it's that meaningful penalty kick. Or a basketball fan, maybe it's the free throw, right, that wins the championship. You can think of these moments that people lose themselves in, and they are not religious by our sort of general substantive definition of them. Or you can think of the experience of this collective jolt that you get at a political rally. If you've ever been to a live political event, you know what I'm talking about. That special feeling in the air, right? That feeling of community that you have with the other attendees when you're under the spell of a mesmerizing public speaker. And by the way, if you notice where this picture is taken, I will point out, this is a bipartisan phenomenon. Happens across the aisle. It's not just one side or the other. Okay, that's point one, right? That things that don't seem religious can in fact be religious or experienced in a religious way. Let's move on to the second point, to totems. Again, it's a word that maybe you're not familiar with, maybe you are, but it means something pretty basic, pretty simple. It means a symbol. That's what it is. It's a symbol, specifically one that represents a group. So when a group comes together, when that effervescence is experienced, that social electricity that I mentioned a few moments ago, people want to give a name to it, right? They want to associate it with something that they know. And so they identify that feeling with a symbol that they can see in the real world, in the material world, a totem. And it represents that feeling, right? That religious feeling and that social feeling, which are one and the same. It represents it to the group itself. Imagine, if you will, students here at Fairfield. And they're wandering around campus, as students are sometimes wont to do, and they're not in a group. They're by themselves. They're isolated, without that effervescence, that social electricity that Durkheim would say is so important. And then one day, they find themselves in the same place, at the same spot, and there's that electricity, right? That social cohesion, and everyone notices it, and they try to ascribe a form to it. They need to find a symbol for it to represent themselves. And they pick a totem, the stag. The stag is their totem. It represents them to themselves as a group. If you don't believe me, go please watch our women's or men's basketball teams. I don't know if they're playing. Go watch Graduation, where you can see complete with stag hands, where they represent the stag to each other, their membership in their clan. For what it's worth, however, I would suggest the turkey is maybe a more appropriate totem for Fairfield students. After all, I've seen maybe a bazillion turkeys here and maybe 3 deer. But the students have so far been unmoved by my and by Ben Franklin's plea on the majesty of the turkey. So I'll let sleeping dogs lie, I suppose. Now, again, I'm being a little bit funny here, but I think my point is a serious one, which is that even something that we see as non-religious can be experienced religiously. And that one element of that, of course, is the creation of a totem, this physical representation of the group. And here's the important part. When the totem is attacked, it's as if the group itself is attacked. That's the feeling. The flag is the most powerful totem in American politics. We interact with it in prescribed ways. Violations of those prescriptions, burning it, trampling it, are taboo. People are often offended by it. It hurts viscerally. It inspires a range of emotions that Carolyn Marvin and David Ingle call the numinous dimension of the flag totem: love, awe, fear. Simply put, the flag is a sacred item, which begs the question, how is it that a sacred totem, like the one we just described, will be altered, cut up, burned in political protest, in political discussion, in art, in creation? To understand this, we need to think about the flag in a different way, from a different perspective. Whereas the totemic flag is about how society is generally oriented toward the flag, where the affection comes from. There's another way of thinking about it, the flag as political object. Not only how we interact with it, but how do we interact with it in a legal sense? And that is a very different question. So we're going to turn our attention that way. Now, you'd maybe be surprised to find out, maybe unsurprised to find out, that there have been many attempts to prevent flag desecration in American history. But what you may not have expected is that this has changed over time in some really interesting and significant ways. First, the question of who is attempting to stop the desecration is important. And second, what do we even mean by desecration? And that's actually also changed over time. Let me start with that who question first, because laws protecting the flag were actually enacted at the state level, not the national level. Again, states protecting the national totem, the national symbol. Now, why would that be? As I tell my students, it all comes down to that F word in American politics. Federalism. I'm not sure what F word you all were thinking of, but federalism. Federalism is enshrined in the Constitution, separates powers between the national and state governments, and for a long time, the national government left criminal enforcement of flag violation to the states. It was considered at the time to be a police power, right, which allows states to regulate health, morality, etc. within their own borders. This is especially the case in the 19th century and early 20th century under what we call dual federalism, where there's a clear distinction between what the national government can do, what the state governments can do, and there's like a little layer between that keeps them from really interacting too much. The reason I have a cake behind me is we often also call that in a rather interesting way. We call it layer cake federalism. So again, national government, state governments, not never the twain shall meet, but very clear distinction between the two. So that's the who, right? Who's acting. But what do we mean by desecration? If I say that there are laws against flag desecration, you may think of physical harm, and that makes a lot of sense. It's how I mentioned it earlier. It's how we think about, for instance, stopping flag burning. But initial laws weren't really aimed at that, right? They weren't certainly enforced that way. The cases that emerged weren't about desecration in the physical sense. They were about marketing. And the logic was that affixing the flag to something just to sell it demeaned the flag and its importance in important ways. The flag was sacred, and this sanctity was protected by keeping the flag out of the marketplace. So, case in point, there was a case, Halter versus Nebraska in 1907, and the case concerned a man named Nicholas Halter, who was accused of violating Nebraska the state, Nebraska's law against flag desecration. This law criminalized using the flag to sell, expose for sale, or have in possession for sale merchandise. Again, using the flag to sell things. But of course, this is exactly what Halter wanted to do. He was trying to sell whiskey, he was trying to sell beer, with the flag on it. And in his defense, he made a few points. He said, first, look, the federal government should regulate the national flag, not the states. That was one argument. The second, related, is that, well, Congress is the lawmaking body. They're the ones who should be telling me not to do this. Congress hasn't said boo, therefore I shouldn't be convicted of this law, which I don't agree with. Here you can see the advertisement itself for Stars and Stripes bottled beer that Halter was convicted of selling. Halter lost, and the court said explicitly why. So, they say, a state may exert its power to strengthen the bonds of the Union and therefore, to that end, may encourage patriotism and love of country among its people. Therefore, a state will be wanting in care of the well-being of its people if it ignores the fact that they regard the flag as a symbol of their country's power and prestige, and will be impatient if any open disrespect is shown towards it. And so here you can see that totemic flag very much at work. The people are going to want the flag protected. If the state is derelict in its duty to protect the flag, the people are going to be upset. So again, there was significant social pressure on keeping the flag protected, at least, of course, in Nebraska. Going back to our Durkheim, just for a moment, religions establish unified beliefs and practices relative to sacred things. So there's sacred time, like festivals, and there's profane time, like harvest and market day. There's sacred space, like a hallowed graveyard, and there's profane space, like public parks. Profane doesn't mean bad. It simply means normal. And what religions do is carve off the sacred from the profane. And so, yes, the flag is a secular object. It's not the Bible, the Quran, or the Talmud, but it does the work of a religious object. As the court acknowledges here, the flag should be kept safe from the profane, from the everyday, from the market. To use the flag in that way would be taboo, it would be a violation, it would threaten the sanctity of that item. As an aside, if Justice Harlan thought selling beer with the flag was bad, he would be spinning in his grave if he saw the Old Glory condoms, which are also on display in For Which It Stands, or a photograph of them is. By the way, that came out way after the point of the story where we are right now. You'll see how we get to this point in a moment. But all this does bring up a serious point, because you and I know that the flag is used to sell things today. You and I see the flag incorporated into designs that people are encouraged to purchase. You can buy flag pants, shirts, sunglasses, bathing suits, shoes, bandanas, bags, watches, sweaters. And that's just only a little bit of what thriftyjinxie.com tells me are the 20 patriotic apparel items to wear on American holidays. Just a selection. The world is your oyster. So what happened? What changed? How did we go from state enforcement to attempts by the national government to protect the flag? And how did we go from accepting that social totemic flag to thinking of it as elemental to political discussion and debate? How do we go from cases addressing advertising to cases addressing speech? And the answer is simple: war. The first real push came during World War I, where the government tried to curtail political speech, specifically the kind of speech the government felt would undermine the war effort, undermine our unity, keeping in mind, of course, that this was also the time when Congress passed the Espionage Act in 1917, Sedition Act in 1918, also the time when the court decided cases like Schenck versus United States, which upheld the conviction of a man distributing leaflets against the draft in World War I. So at the national level, all that's going on. And again, at the state level, the flag still continues to enjoy significant protections. But again, this time when they're going to court, the issue isn't about advertising anymore. It's about protest. It's about political speech. Ernest Starr, who's pictured here, was convicted in Montana of contemptuous and slurring statements about the flag after he was pressured to buy Liberty bonds. He reportedly said, "What is this thing anyway? Nothing but a piece of cotton and a little paint on it and some other marks in the corner there. I will not kiss that thing. It might be covered in microbes." It's amazing how sometimes things come back around, I suppose. His case was denied. He asked for habeas corpus. It was denied by the District Court of Montana, and he was sentenced to 10 to 20 years of labor. Ultimately, that sentence was commuted. He only served 35 months, which is still just shy of 3 years. And it's one example. But that's World War I. How about World War II? Because actually between the war years, unsurprisingly, cases about protest and the flag, they kind of die away because people aren't as agitated. They're not as active politically, certainly in this sense. Anti-desecration cases continued to crop up in subsequent wars, though. World War II, for instance, saw both Gobitis versus Minersville in 1940 and Barnett versus West Virginia in 1943. The first allowed the expulsion of students for not reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, but the second, just 3 years later, reversed it, changed it. And it's in Barnett that we start to see the sort of protections we recognize today. As Justice Jackson famously put it, if there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion, or force citizens to confess by word or act their faith therein. And so what we see here is a shift. The totemic flag, again, is about recognizing unity, that we all have a desire for it, right? And we do. We all have a desire for it. We all have a desire for an outward expression of our membership in a group. It's all the more understandable that this will be heightened during wartime, when we feel under threat. But the court here is recognizing a different point, which is that in a liberal democracy, we need to allow discussion. And rather than codify the flag's sanctity, we need to keep it open to debate. And so legislation protecting the flag began to be viewed through this lens of free speech, of the First Amendment. It was more important that we allow that debate about the flag as a political object than to protect it as a social entity. Unsurprisingly, this is also the time when the Supreme Court incorporated or started to incorporate the First Amendment through the 14th Amendment, through selective incorporation, which simply means that a whole slew of rights, especially speech, which had been only applying to action by the national government, now, because of the 14th Amendment, starts to be applied to the states. Right? This starts to happen during the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. And it's when also the court adopt what we call preferred position, meaning, again, going back to speech, that some constitutional protections, like those in the First Amendment, like speech, press, religion, are given greater protections because they are seen as essential to human freedom. Which brings us to Vietnam, a time of noted civility, tranquility, and when absolutely nothing bad happened. In 1968, Congress, in response to the Vietnam-era protests, passed the Flag Protection Act, and it codified the sort of suggestions present in the U.S. Flag Code from 1942. Again, no mutilation, defacing, burning, etc. And it was a response to the public pressure and the state's vested interest in protecting the symbol of the nation during wartime. Congress was, again, reasserting this sacred flag, the importance of protecting the flag. And it was really, again, the first time that the national government, really through Congress, starts to enact penalties for harming the flag. And it was in direct response to the court's push, again, for seeing the flag as an issue of speech. Not just speech, but political speech. That's the highest, most indispensable kind of speech in a political society. And so we find ourselves in a unique position. And it's one that many of us still find ourselves in today. We have a symbol of incredible emotional power, one that represents society as a whole, one that is revered, fought for, and died for, but a symbol that, by the nature of that sanctity, becomes immensely important in political discussion, becomes immensely powerful, especially when it's violated, because it can be violated. Because when it is burned, it communicates a clear political message. The fact that it is taboo to burn it makes the message all the more powerful. Not just burn, by the way, but manipulate, change, alter. And so what happens to these two positions when they're pitted against each other? In the 20 years between 1969 and 1989, the Supreme Court systematically chips away at the anti-flag desecration laws. In Street versus New York in 1969, an African-American World War II veteran, Sidney Street, burned an American flag after the assassination of James Meredith, a civil rights activist. He was convicted of a New York law that outlawed both burning and casting contempt on the flag, verbal disparagement. Now, the court overturned the portion of the law, the New York law, that criminalized verbally disparaging the flag. Right? Again, it's protected speech at that point. It doesn't touch the flag burning component. But you can see again that we're looking at this through this angle of speech. Smith v. Godwin in 1974, the court overturned a Massachusetts law that criminalized treating the flag contemptuously because it said that that was vaguely worded. It's not clear what it means. Valerie Godwin, by the way, wore a flag on the seat of his pants, so he was sitting on it. That was deemed to be, by the state of Massachusetts at least, contemptuous. Supreme Court disagreed. Spence versus Washington in 1974, a student who had added a peace sign to the flag was convicted of defacing the flag. Again, you can't technically add things to it according to the law, at least in Washington. And this was overturned by the Supreme Court in a per curiam decision, a decision of the court. And then we get to Texas versus Johnson. This is the famous one, because this is the one that tells us that burning the flag is symbolically protected speech. George Lee Johnson is upset with the Reagan administration and burns a flag in protest. The court found that, again, that speech was symbolic, it was political in nature, and therefore deserved protection of the First Amendment. In the majority opinion, Justice Brennan writes, again, this position that fully articulates this notion of flag desecration and flag burning now in this question of speech. And he says, if there is a bedrock principle underlying the First Amendment, it is that the government may not prohibit the expression of an idea simply because society finds the idea itself offensive or disagreeable. Later on, he says that if we were to hold that a state may forbid flag burning whenever it is likely to endanger the flag's symbolic role, for instance, burning it in protest, but allow it whenever burning a flag promotes that role, for instance, ceremonial retirement, we would be saying that when it comes to impairing the flag's physical integrity, the flag may be used as a symbol only in one direction. So, that's the state of where we are sort of in terms of Supreme Court precedent. Before closing, I do think it's helpful to think a little bit about where we are today. It's in the news. It's in my essay, actually. Last year, President Trump signed an executive order directing his attorney general to prosecute people who burn the flag. And before talking about what the executive order does, how it works, it is helpful again to reiterate how this fits into our expectations around the social flag, the totemic flag, the one that Durkheim talks about. If you read the text of the executive order, it says, our great American flag is the most sacred and cherished symbol of the United States of America and of American freedom, identity, and strength. Desecrating it is uniquely offensive and provocative. It is a statement of contempt, hostility, and violence against our nation. Again, the flag is sacred and cherished. It's a symbol of our freedom, strength, and identity. Desecrating it is uniquely offensive, and it represents contempt, hostility, and violence against the nation. The executive order harkens back again to that logic we just talked about in Halter. Now, while the executive order says it's about flag burning, it isn't really about that. And bear with me here. It is about speech, because it does acknowledge that we live in the reality of a post-Texas versus Johnson world. Specifically, it relies upon a concept called imminent lawless action. It's a test established by Brandenburg versus Ohio, a case about the KKK being allowed to say terrible, horrible, hateful things, but again, those being protected. Imminent lawless action says that speech is protected unless it is about to lead to the immediate breach of the peace. And this is what the Trump administration is saying it's going to prosecute. It's going to prosecute when the flag burning is going to lead to imminent lawless action. As with all criminal prosecutions, prosecutors, in this case the AG, has discretion about which cases are going to be brought. Now, what this leads to, possibly, is a return to what happened during the 1970s, 1980s. Abby Hoffman, the liberal Vietnam War protester, was prosecuted for wearing the flag as a shirt. Similarly, General Richard Myers, chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was left alone. And the issue, of course, is that the same difficulty could emerge today that emerged in the past. which is, why are some people prosecuted and not others? The law dictates that you cannot target someone for their political beliefs. And so, arguably, if this were to make it to the court, if it were to be enforced and someone is arrested and prosecuted, they would then go to the court, file a court case. I don't know how it gets around that problem. And most other legal scholars agree with that. But the point being, the totemic flag is alive and well. And again, it's an ongoing discussion. And as I come to a close, where does this leave us? We started this evening by mentioning the soiling of Old Glory, this photograph taken 50 years ago during another national birthday. And I asked, what kind of nation are we? And who are we as a country, rather? And if I could hazard an answer, I do think it's important to realize that the totemic flag and the speech flag are both our reality. Durkheim says the totem represents the group, and this is true. But as I was thinking about it, it occurred to me that the U.S. motto, who we are, is e pluribus unum, out of many one. And so notions of unity and difference are baked into our DNA. And if you're like me and you feel the pull of both flags, the totemic flag, the flag that we revere and want to protect, that moves us to tears, that hopefully we see hoisted high over many an Olympic podium in a few weeks. And the speech flag, the one that you use, that I use, and yes, we sometimes abuse as part of our political views. And as the U.S. turns 250, again, who are we as a country? And what I think is that the flag does represent us as a whole. We want to see ourselves in it. We want to be in our flag. Stanley Forman's picture specifically for me, and of course other works in for which it stands, reminds me of a core truth. That the flag tells us, the flag doesn't tell us who we are. We tell the flag what it means. And that takes a healthy amount of respect and reverence on the one hand, and willingness to disagree with each other on the other. With that, thank you all for being here, and I look forward to some Q&A. And I think there are some microphones around. Yes.
Hi, Aaron.
Hey, Brian, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks. What unifies all the countries in the world is that every one of them has a flag. Mm-hmm. So how unique is what you described today to us about the American flag compared to other countries in the world?
It's a great question. So certainly the notion of the totemic flag would apply to all, right? It is a human sort of condition, right, to sort of create this totem and to look for membership in a group. So that component would be the same. It would be religious in that sense. To the extent that it would be different between the U.S. and other countries. The U.S. has a particular civil religion, the stuff that I study, and it is sort of path-dependent based upon the nation's history, the founding during the Revolution, the crisis of the Civil War. If you actually look back at how the flag was seen prior to the Civil War, there were a bunch of different flags. There was no sort of really one single flag that people identified. And the Civil War, the particular flag was used and was brought back by people who fought in that war, and then it became sort of elemental to the sort of the second refounding of American national identity post-crisis. And so to the extent that that would be different between us and other countries, I could see that being the case. And then certainly, of course, with the question of free speech. Right? I know that, again, hashtag not a legal scholar, hashtag not international relations scholar. My understanding of, for instance, German free speech law, English free speech law, of course, is very different from the U.S. So I don't know how they deal with symbolic speech, but that would be also another potential difference, too.
How would you deal with people that desecrate our flag, but they're not American? Are they protected by that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great question. I believe that the flag, changing the flag, burning the flag, loving the flag, engaging with the flag is a human right, right? if, for instance, you were to look at, like I said, the executive order, there is a portion of that that deals with how non-Americans are treated. I don't find that helpful, right, personally. In terms of chilling speech, I think that anything that chills speech is bad. If, for instance, people who were not American citizens weren't allowed to engage with the flag, they couldn't express political beliefs. Again, looking at a lot of the art in the For Which It Stands exhibit, they wouldn't be allowed, or they'd be maybe discouraged from engaging with the flag as a piece of art, as a way of communicating a message, and that wouldn't be good, right? I think that commitment to liberal democratic values, right, is the sort of the benchmark. I would hope that that's where we are. To the extent that that is part of America's civil religion, that's a good part. Yeah, does that help?
So I wonder how many other countries actually have their national anthem be about the flag as opposed to about the nation. Mm-hmm. And what bearing does the fact that our national anthem is the Star-Spangled Banner have on the American psyche and the resulting totemic attitudes toward the flag itself?
It's an excellent question, and unfortunately, so I'll beg off the question on how many other nations have the flag as the centerpiece of their national anthem. I do not know the answer to that, unfortunately, but I can say that, again, the flag being so central to our national mythos, right? Sort of Francis Scott Key and the flag in the War of 1812, right? That, it is still there. Like, it is a beautiful song. And I would say, I'm not sure if it's unique among nations. I have not heard of another nation that really does focus on its flag as its most sort of important enough to mention in the national anthem. I can say that my colleague Joe Yarrington and I are teaching a class, an honors seminar this semester. And we asked the students what they thought of when they saw the flag. And one of them mentioned it was just striking, right? They love the colors, that there's something about the flag that's visually appealing. And it could be, again, that we are acculturated to, socialized to the flag at very young ages. And so it's with us. But I do think, we see it everywhere. Like, how many flags do you think you passed on the way here? Or you passed in your daily life? When I was a kid, again, children think certain things. I grew up in New Hampshire, right? So certainly not the center of the United States. And there was a place with a huge flag. Like, it's so big it probably wouldn't even wave. And I was like, that has to be the American flag. There has to be one of them, and that's got to be it. Look at how big it is. And yet, as long as you follow the pattern and the dimensions, it's all an American flag. And they're everywhere. And again, now, because of the way advertising is now done, it's also like in the clothing that we wear, the bags that we carry. I do think it's really central to our national identity.
So I guess two questions. One is, I would argue that we have a greater totem, which is called the Constitution.
Yes.
So the flag is subsidiary to that, and perhaps it is the 14th Amendment that gave us that over time, that made the Constitution the thing. But I have a question about totems, and I guess I kind of want to say anti-totems, because when you said what gives us more of a visceral response, I live in Connecticut, I live here, and if I say the flag, it gives you one response, but if I say Donald Trump, there is such a negative visceral response to that person. It seems to me that's more of a totem for people these days than the flag itself. I mean, and it's how should we say, a negative totem, but or a reverse or a curse of pox upon your house kind of. But I don't know if you want to comment on that or not.
No, absolutely, yes. Okay, so first, the question of the Constitution being a greater totem than the flag. So the answer is, in many ways, I agree with you, right? The Constitution certainly matters more in our political lives, dictating, again, the kind of constitution, the kind of government that we have. I was talking to one of my students who also wrote a paper about the flag, and we were discussing, why the flag might be different. And I'll put it to you this way. I don't know of laws that criminalize burning the Constitution. Aside from the actual real Constitution, which please, by the way, do not go try to do. It would be very hard and very bad. But if I go buy a facsimile that looks exactly like the real one and I burn it, there's no law against that. I can do that. There were attempts and there were laws about burning the flag. If I were to buy a mock-up thing of the Statue of Liberty and blow it up, right? Again, please don't do that. Again, aside from like the blowing it up part, potentially hurting somebody, there's nothing about blowing up the Statue of Liberty itself. It's because the flag is special in this sort of visceral way, is the only way I can really explain it. And your second question about anti-totems. So there's a scholar, Michael Novak, who you all maybe have heard of, prominent neoconservative writer. He died probably 2010, 2011. He wrote a book in the 1970s called Choosing Our King. And in it, it's all about civil religion and the presidency. And at one point, he says the reason why we know the president is a religious office, because again, totems are all across our culture, right? Maybe I was talking about the flag as a really good example of one, but there are others. The president is another one of them. And the president is what we would call it the high priest of America's civil religion, the Pontifex Maximus. And when you do not like the president, Novak says it turns your heart against itself because you don't want that. You want to love your president. You want to look up to your president. And so when you disagree with, when you do not like the president, that hurts. And again, that happens to Democrats today with Donald Trump. It happened to Republicans 4 years ago with Joe Biden. It happened to Democrats 8 years ago with Donald Trump. It happened to Republicans 12 years ago with Barack Obama, right? It is sort of where we are in a polarized, hyper-polarized world. I suspect that the next president, regardless of party, is going to have a good half the country who's very upset with them, right? So it's a very good question. It operates as a totem in a slightly different way, but in a way that is also intelligible and also very legitimate. I am aware of time. Can I find someone who could alert me as to time? One more question. There we go. One more question.
Thank you. It's not a question. It's a couple of comments, which I'd love to hear your comments about. When you showed the first opening slide of the flag, you asked what we thought. You talked about what your students were thinking. The first thoughts that came to my mind were conflict and conscience. There was nothing peaceful about that flag. The next slide you showed, when the white, what can I call him, anti-protester was trying to jab the black man with the flag, was particularly symbolic and realistic for today, and it represented to me the idea of exclusivity and stereotypes and racism and bigotry. And then with regard to what the gentleman previous to me said about there's a visceral reaction when you mention Trump, that should not be a surprise, because I heard him speak yesterday morning and he's deranged. And he makes no, and he continues to promise things, and at the end of his speech, the entire audience of world leaders, I assume, got up and applauded him. How does this relate to now? Because I have these conversations every day with various people I encounter, including many immigrants who came here. And yes, one of yesterday's conversations in the local sauna was with a gentleman from Uzbekistan who is a medical doctor at Yale, who was trying to convince me that the African Americans have produced no scientists, have produced nobody worth recognizing. Now, this is not exactly a shock to me, as I also speak to immigrants who are praising Trump. Now, I'm using Trump as an example because he is the example. And having grown up and lived through the 60s, I could not have imagined today. But then when you consider that 38% of the country who were all glued to The Apprentice voted for him, and the rest of us didn't have enough people to vote, then I looked at that flag that you presented, and it was conflict versus conscience. So I'm very interested to hear what you think. Thank you.
No, thank you. So what I will say, I really love the framing of conflict and conscience, because if you think about the way I think about it, civil religion, again, what I study, basically says that there are symbols, beliefs, and rituals that relate people to the country in a metaphysical way, transcendent way. And it is in most definitions, it is a moral sort of normative concept. It's a good thing for us to have, that we want to have. And so seeing the flag as conflict, to me, I think it's a realistic way of thinking about it. Because even in the golden ages of politics, people have disagreed with each other. Now, I did not live through the 1960s. I'm living through now. I can talk to people who lived through the 60s. I imagine they would say that this is similar to, maybe not as bad as, maybe worse than that time. Opinions may differ. But conflict is endemic to any political culture, right? Because people are going to, in a free society, disagree with each other. The conscience part, I think, is really interesting and helpful, because it calls us to, Lincoln said, the better angels of our nature, right? And so as a nation that does try to perfect itself, right, that does try to be better, that does try to grow, I think that's the promise, that's the conscience. I think that we all are able to hear that. And I think that a nation that stands for an idea is a special thing. And conscience being intimately linked with ideas, I think, is really special. So I can see them as sort of, one is the real part, and one is the aspirational part. So that's how I would answer the question. And thank you for it. It's very thought-provoking. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And please, come to the reception. Come see the exhibition. It truly is breathtaking and fantastic. I am so proud to be part of it, and proud also for Carrie Weber for putting it together. So thank you all.